An opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for convening this important hearing. The Deepwater Horizon events obviously represent a shocking tragedy. 11 lives were lost, and we all regret that. Environmental and economic harm continues to the area, and we don't know what caused the disaster. But it is apparent that there was a failure, and now this committee, and indeed the American people, want answers, and they want accountability. This hearing is preliminary. It's a necessary step in getting the answers and getting to that accountability, and it's why I support the efforts of the committee to move rapidly on this investigation. What caused the blowout and the explosion, the failure of the various emergency safeguards on the seafloor, and the immediate response to stem the oil spill deserve our close and thorough scrutiny. Unfortunately, today's hearing and the committee's investigation is what one might call asymmetric oversight. The committee has demanded and obtained thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of documents and testimony from the 4 companies represented today, but we've obtained virtually nothing from those federal agencies that were responsible for the licensing and oversight of these operations. Nothing from the Obama administration, who presumably has already had discussions with likely many of you as to what went wrong and what might be done to mitigate the problem, but no documents, no testimony from the administration or from any of the relevant federal agencies. With the benefit of additional interviews and document review, we should have included an examination of other factors in the incident, including the role of inspections, including the role of federal inspections and oversight of drilling operations, practices and technology, and indeed the licensing of same. The federal role would appear to be an integral part of our story. We should have heard from the Secretary of the Interior today. And as Ranking Member Barton and I have respectfully requested, Mr. Stupak, of you and Chairman Waxman, and we would like for that hearing to, since it's not occurring today, to occur in the near future. We will hear from others in the administration and other officials under oath in the near future, and I think it is mandatory that this committee do that. We should have representatives from the Department of Interior and from Mineral Management Services here to explain why in March of 2009, in the initial exploration plan for the Deepwater Horizon, a blowout scenario was not contemplated by BP, and why, therefore, the site-specific oil spill response plan was, in fact, not even required by these regulators. I would also emphasize the subcommittee should resist the temptation to push ahead on the facts and to lose their perspective. The drilling and production operations are not experimental forays into the deep ocean with untested technology. For over 50 years, these have been well-engineered and well-planned operations. Until this tragedy, there was a remarkably good record for overall Gulf oil production. The Gulf produces about 1.7 million barrels of oil per day, 6.5 billion cubic feet of natural gas, about 1/3 of the total United States daily supply, on 3,500 platforms employing 35,000 workers. In recent years, the bulk of new production has come from deep-sea operations, with scores of exploratory and production wells developed at depths equal to or substantially greater than the 5,000-foot depths of the Deepwater Horizon, all without serious incidents. In point of fact, this is the first spill of magnitude in the Gulf waters. This is not to minimize the disaster we confront today. 11 lives were lost. 4 million gallons of oil has been released into a very fragile ecosystem, an ecosystem that has likely over 7,000 miles of actual ocean frontage on the coast of Louisiana. This past Friday, I went to the Gulf with members of the subcommittee, Chairman Markey and Ranking Member Barton, to learn firsthand about the recovery operations that were going on and the magnitude of the problems that the people in the Gulf face from what we saw flying over the spill really cannot be captured in news photos. The oil slick looks to be the size of Montana. It reinforces why it is absolutely critical that we ensure that the responders have what they need to control and mitigate the spill, and for the future's sake, we must identify what caused the spill. Our visit also reinforced how critical timing was in the incident and the immediate response to the blowout. We understand that the initial failure of the blowout preventer was critical to the lack of containment of the spill. Had it worked as designed or worked in a timely fashion in those initial hours or days after the blowout, we might be having a hearing that was focused on entirely different problems today. What the blowout and subsequent failure of the blowout preventer tells us about the process and operations, we actually don't yet know, but it may reveal issues of mechanical failure, systems failure, human error, or a combination of the three. What we hope we do not find is that corners were needlessly cut in order to save time and money, because ultimately now time and money are what are at risk. Potential issues with material integrity or procedures in the construction of the well may provide a clue to how an apparently unexpected gas release occurred in the first place. All such issues may illuminate areas that better need operational oversight by the well's producers, the industry, and again, those charged with the regulation of same. Which is why a hearing like this, which is asymmetric in its construct, it's why it is inadequate to really address the problems. I do look forward to hearing the testimony from our key witnesses in the incident: British Petroleum, the operator of the well; Transocean, the driller and rig owner; Halliburton, the provider of various services, including the critical cementing; and Cameron, which manufactured the blowout preventer at the center of the current efforts to stop the flow of oil. But the regulators have failed a litany of questions need to be asked and must be asked of those inspectors at Department of Interior and Mineral Management Services. For what it's worth, I want to welcome the witnesses to our committee. I understand you've been going through a very difficult schedule and amidst what is undoubtedly an enormous tragedy within your businesses. And I appreciate your willingness to come forward and discuss what you know with the subcommittee. Time is going to be critical today. You've all been through a day of Senate hearings, and some of the testimony that's come forward has been predictable, but some of it has been contradictory and troubling in the testimony that we heard yesterday in the Senate. And I'm hopeful that maybe we can clear up some of these discrepancies and that you'll in fact address them in your opening statements to us today. At the hearings yesterday, Mr. McKay, you testified that the modifications that were made to the blow-up preventer and that the claims that your company, BP, was not aware of those. And Mr. Newman, you testified that Transocean made the modifications in 2005 at BP's request and at BP's expense. So, Mr. McKay, in your opening, please tell us, is this true? Did BP, in fact, request and pay for these modifications? And if so, would BP not have some documentation of this? And if that is the case, why are we hearing from our staff that BP was shocked to hear about the modifications? And to Mr. Newman, tell us in your opening, what modifications did you do? Did Transocean fully inform BP of everything it did to the blow-up protector? Do you have documents to back yourself up? Did you inform BP about any labeling discrepancy in the device itself? So we need to cut through some of those contradictions and become aware of the facts. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, let me just go back to the issue of who's not here today. In the public information, the publicly released document, which is the application for the drilling of the Deepwater Horizon, there's some serious questions. There's some serious red flags, and I would very much like to have Secretary Salazar here. I would very much like to have Mineral Management Services here. Section 2.0, general information. 2.7, blowout scenario. A scenario for a blowout, a potential blowout of the well from which BP would expect to have the highest volume of liquid hydrocarbons is not required for the operations proposed in this exploration potential. Well, wait a minute. That's one thing for BP to say that, but why did the federal regulators just simply rubber stamp this when it was pushed across their desk? You have a well that had the potential to produce 100,000 barrels of oil a day, and we're now shocked that 5,000 barrels a day are escaping, and we've got no plan for mitigation. The state of Louisiana is scrambling for boom material to protect its fragile coastline. We didn't have anything stockpiled ahead of time. We had to move equipment in and drill a 90-day relief well because that's the only way to stop this thing. It just seems like more care should have been delivered up front. And yes, while I may criticize the companies that are here in front of us today, I've also got serious questions that this committee needs to ask of the federal agency that was charged with the oversight. When I get to the questions, there are many other statements in this application that are just as troubling. An offshore coastal dispersion modeling report for the proposed operations is not required for the operations. You could lose control of a 100,000 barrel a day production well, and you don't have to have a modeling report for offshore coastal dispersion. It goes on. And again, don't necessarily fault the company for perhaps trying to save a buck on the application, but the federal agency responsible for this that simply stamped it received and approved, that's where the problem exists in my mind. Last Friday, when we were down on the Gulf Coast, the Times-Picayune had an extensive article on what happened on the rig that day. They talk about the removal of the drilling mud prematurely. I hope somebody at some point will address that the drilling mud was removed and replaced with seawater before the second cement plug was placed, and subsequent to that was when the blowout occurred. Was, in fact, there some haste at getting this done? Did we depart from best practices, or is that standard practice now and something that maybe needs to be revisited on other wells that are being drilled at the time? And then finally, this morning's Washington Post, just a stunning paragraph from a columnist where Mr. McKay points out, our operating management system in the Gulf of Mexico is as good as anyone. I can't point to any deficiencies. Well, maybe that was true in March, but it's certainly not true in May. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. I'll yield back.